Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. Boris Tizenhausen is with you. Today is June 23rd. Here are the main news stories at this moment. In Crimea, the situation for the occupiers is getting worse every day. I'd even say every hour. The Kerch thermal power plant has left the chat after an attack by our drones. And power outages are happening all over Crimea, in Yevpatoria, Krasnoperekopsky, Saki, Jankoy, and Krasnogvardeyski districts. Madhya's prophecy is coming true. Moscow really will fall in Crimea. At the same time, air defense systems in Crimea are also being actively taken out. Here is the list of targets that were hit in Crimea in just one day. Oil storage tanks and a thermal power plant in Kerch, a Pantsir S-1 in Bagarovo, an S-300 launcher in Kurotnoye, a Nebo-U radar in Kerch, a Zu-23 anti-aircraft gun in Kurotnoye, the Zapadno-Krimskaya substation in Karyernoye, the Simferopol gas distribution station, and the village of Trudovoye in Crimea. But that's still far from everything. That is, Ukrainian drones feel absolutely at ease near the Kerch bridge. By the way, it's one of the most, perhaps heavily guarded sites. Previously, for something to reach there and set fire to the storage tanks just 900 meters from the Crimean bridge, it was considered something unimaginable. But now, literally every day, something flies in there. And if someone thought yesterday wasn't enough, today our drones added even more. That is, not only was the oil transshipment and storage complex in the port of Kerch attacked, but also the port of Kavkaz. That's over there on the Russian side, on the Chushka Spit. And today, bridges and military facilities in Henichesk and on the Arabat Spit were also attacked. They're hitting the occupiers so hard it's making the pipes rattle. Special attention is being paid to the Kerch Peninsula. There, they're actively knocking out air defense systems wherever they can reach. Soon, there probably won't be anything left to cover the bridge with. That's when things will get really interesting. But that's not all. Ukrainian drones are destroying Russian equipment right on the pontoons that have been set up near the destroyed Chonhar bridge. Let's take a look at a wonderful video from the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine showing how our drones simply cancel out the military delivery of supplies and fuel to the Russian army. In the video, which I'll show you now, you can see that neither the electronic warfare systems installed on the trucks nor the mobile fire teams, who scatter quickly at the appearance of our drones, are able to save the Russians. Take a look.
Повітряна тривога, лети до Таганрога, дістань до Волгограда, Саратов потруси, нехай гримить в Тамбові, Рязані та Ростові, як до Москви дістанешся, то нахуй рознеси. Дехто каже, що це гріх і так не треба, гнів та розпач можуть карму зіпсувать. Бачу сльози, чути стогін аж до неба. За це все к***и мають поздихать. Повітряна тривога, лети до Таганрога, влупи як слід Вороніж і Курском закоси. Єлабугу поштрикай, Новгород великий, як до Москви дістанешся, то нахуй рознеси.
Beautiful. I wonder how many kamikaze drivers like this are left in Russia, those who are willing to get behind the wheel of military fuel trucks that travel along the road of death or across the crossings. Well, we'll find out soon enough. Fewer and fewer. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's important for the channel's growth. We are fighting against Putin's propaganda, and together we can do it much more effectively. So be sure to subscribe. You can do it right now. And one more piece of news. According to Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, the railway bridge over the North Crimean Canal in Crimea no longer exists. This bridge connected the peninsula with the mainland part of Ukraine. We're waiting for Putin to announce that this was a planned dismantling. In fact, that's exactly how they had it all planned out for themselves. By the way, Solovyov is just having some kind of meltdown on every show. He starts almost every program with a moment of silence. The invited guests all have such sour faces. Solovyov keeps losing his temper and yelling. He doesn't even know what to say anymore. How can all of this be explained? Solovyov's nerves are starting to give out. And do you remember another propagandist, Oklobistin? The one who used to shout, "Goida, you disgusting little louse"? Well, do you know what he's saying now? Let me just show you. Watch this video.
Да, бомбят нас нещадно. В труху разносят проказники инфраструктуру Первопрестольной. Но не станем печалиться, земляки. Не будем забывать о великой гармонии русского хаоса. За эти беды обязательно кто-то будет должен понести ответственность. Искать будут тщательно, ведь беды-то немалые. Полетят головы воров-чиновников, дураков-депутатов, паркетных генералов, не проливших ни одной капли крови в бою. А на их места придут порядочные, компетентные, умные люди. Они-то и приведут нас к победе. А если этого не произойдет, то пусть все сгорит дотла. Нам к этому не привыкать. С Москвой уже такое не раз было.
Wow, now that's a transformation in rhetoric. Goida, goida, everyone go forward and win then. If we don't win, then we'll just burn everything down here. So it turns out, in his view, it's not Putin who's to blame, but the deputies, officials, and armchair generals. So how did everything change like that? He even allows for the possibility of Russia's defeat. He says, and if we don't win, then we'll just burn everything down. Well, as for everything burning to the ground out there in the swamps, we actually don't mind at all. In fact, we'll even hand over the matches and gasoline. By that time, Russia will definitely have a problem with that. But don't drag it out over there, don't delay, go ahead and set it on fire right now. Or I think there's an even simpler way to do it. Russians just line up that handful of senile KGB men, those sycophantic clowns, propagandists, deranged priests, and churchmen against the wall, and then we can start negotiations. By the way, I think that the Freedom of Russia Legion and the Russian Volunteer Corps could perfectly well represent the interests of the Russian Federation. And right now, Ukraine is performing an incredible feat. I think you can clearly see that in the news. And in every episode, we have an important fundraiser for the defense forces of Ukraine. Today, we are continuing to raise funds for electronic warfare equipment for the 33rd Assault Regiment, which is defending the Zaporizhzhia direction. These assault troops are always the first to face the enemy. The soldiers need electronic warfare equipment to protect themselves from enemy drones, vehicle-mounted EW, trench EW, and individual units. The soldiers have recorded an address to you. Please take a look.
Ми бійці 33-го окремого штурмового полку, що воює зараз на Запорізькому напрямку. Сьогодні на фронті технології змінюються дуже швидко. Противник активно використовує FPV та розвідувальні дрони, НРК. Тому нам постійно доводиться адаптуватися та посилювати захист. Одним з найефективніших рішень є засоби радіоелектронної боротьби, які дозволяють подавляти сигнали керування дронами та захищати бійців та техніку. Звертаємося по допомогу до спільноти Бориса Тизенгаузена. Штурмовикам потрібні окопний реп, автомобільний реп та індивідуальний реп для захисту бійців та техніки. Кожен такий засіб – це шанс зберегти життя воїнів та техніку. Дякуємо всім і кожному. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
Let's help our assault troops from the 33rd Regiment. The link to donate is in the description of this video. There are mono, private, and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad. There's also a QR code. If you're watching on another channel, it will also take you to the fundraiser. Your donation directly saves the lives of our defenders. And thank you so much for supporting our warriors and supporting Ukraine. Thank you so much. Amid news that's unpleasant for Putin, something suddenly starts happening. One after another, Putin's officials are making statements. Russia is ready for dialogue with Europe. Putin's aide Ushakov made this statement. Ready already? What happened? And Lavrov, look at this. Russia is ready to resume negotiations with Ukraine from the point where they were halted. Lavrov made this statement. As soon as things started heating up in Crimea, as soon as strikes hit Moscow and St. Petersburg, as soon as fuel problems began all over Russia, look how quickly they started singing a different tune. Russians always become very willing to negotiate when they get beaten up. Well, by the way, the opposite is also true. As soon as the situation changes, they immediately jump off the negotiations. By the way, Lavrov also added that Zelensky is putting forward absolutely unrealistic and even rude conditions for negotiations. Oh, why are you whining, Lavrov? Go complain to the sports lottery. They gave this mothballed Kremlin gang a good kick, and look how they started whining right away. And Lavrov also decided to stand up for Lukashenko, saying, "Don't touch Lukashenko or we'll immediately take revenge for him." Basically, Lavrov made it clear that Russia could use any kind of weapon if Ukraine attacks Belarus. According to Lavrov, Russia will provide military assistance. That's how he commented on Zelensky's threats to attack relay stations on Belarusian territory. Let me remind you, Lukashenko's ultimatum expires at the end of this week, so there's really not much time left. By the way, he's apparently planning to go on some kind of long-term business trip. He packed his suitcases, grabbed his Spitz under his arm, his belt for radiculitis, Kolya's bicycle, and got ready to run off somewhere. You'll see, I think he'll even fly to Putin, by the way. Some fans of the elderly clubber Lukashenko have started spreading the idea that the treaty with the Russian Federation supposedly includes the use of Russian nuclear weapons if one of the countries in the treaty is attacked. Seriously? Nuclear weapons? Putin is going to use nukes for Lukashenko? Putin didn't use nukes even when our soldiers entered Russian territory. Remember the Kursk region? And now all of a sudden he's supposed to use them because of the mustachioed chip? He won't use them because he knows that if he does, he personally won't have much time left to live. So what will Putin do if Ukraine strikes the relay stations? He'll shell Ukraine again. Only this time he'll say, and this shelling is for Lukashenko. Or what else will he do? In the end, Putin will very easily give up Lukashenko himself, just like he gave up his other buddy allies. It's actually interesting how Lukashenko and Putin talk about this topic. Well, listen, Lukashenko, yeah, I gave up Maduro, I gave up Yanukovych, I gave up Assad, but I definitely won't give you up. Trust me. And ahem, and woof, woof, woof. Interesting news is also coming in from Voronezh. The clearing of debris continues at the Sbornka military factory, which was hit by friendly cruise missiles. The residents of Voronezh are outraged. It turns out they weren't given an air raid warning, just like the people in Moscow. The bomb shelters were closed, and in general, people are discussing in chats that the authorities are hiding the number of casualties at this factory. As I understand it, local authorities all over Russia are generally advised not to sound the air raid siren so that there's no panic. Meanwhile, the Voronezh authorities are concealing information about the strike, saying there are 5 bodies. They say yes, an entire building collapsed, but there are only supposedly 5 bodies. The locals don't believe it because, as you can imagine, some people had friends working there, others have relatives from Voronezh. And it's pretty hard to hide this information, especially in Voronezh. And people are writing in chats that the number of missing persons, as they call them, is dozens and dozens, more than 100. Well, that's what happens when you work at a military factory, soldering circuit boards for Russian missiles that kill Ukrainians. That's how it goes. I would even say that this will happen to everyone who works at Russia's military factories. And let me emphasize, ballistic missiles haven't even come into play yet. And apparently that's something we'll talk about a bit later. Some very interesting gifts landed at that factory. So yesterday during the strike on that factory in Voronezh, I thought, let me check what Putin is up to. And it turns out Putin was laying flowers at monuments to cities, and he also laid flowers at the monuments to Kiev and Odessa. In other words, he's completely insane. Take a look at this photo. So, he lays flowers at the monuments to Ukrainian cities, and then gives the order to bomb those very cities. I mean, he's just completely insane. Here's another interesting point. Some Vatnik-type characters regularly show up in the comments on my social media posts, writing their comments, well, just all sorts of nonsense. This happens regularly, but what's interesting about it? I deliberately leave those comments up so that all of us can give them a piece of our mind. But what's astonishing is that when you look at this person's profile, you see that they don't live in Syzran or Voronezh, but for example in Latvia or Germany or the USA. They support Putin, yet live in the hated West. This has always been a mystery to me. Well, for example, if I despise and don't respect Putin's Russia, I don't go there to live, I don't torture myself. What's the secret? Maybe someone knows why they put themselves through this? And by the way, if you were to take the little monkey out of these people's heads, the one banging cymbals, and temporarily put a brain in there, they'd realize that the country they live in is imposing sanctions against Russia. And they'd also realize that part of their taxes goes, among other things, to arming Ukraine. I remember when some old KGB agent was deported from Latvia, he was sobbing uncontrollably at the border. He just didn't want to return to his historical homeland. He should have been happy, but instead he was crying. Another piece of news. The head of the main intelligence directorate, Oleg Ivashchenko, and the commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, Magyar, will be put on the international wanted list. This was announced by the Investigative Committee of Russia. Well, I don't know how Oleg Ivashchenko and Magyar will even cope with this terrible news. What kind of international wanted list is this? Russia's. What kind of search is that? In Russia, Belarus, North Korea, and maybe somewhere else in Afghanistan, because they have normal relations with the Taliban. What kind of international wanted list is that? And one more piece of news. This is all of Russia. In this news, you see all of Russia. Russian children need to be prepared for war with NATO and the European Union right after elementary school, said Viktor Vodolatsky, first deputy chairman of the State Duma Committee on CIS Affairs of the Russian Federation. Well, yes, they're planning to prepare a children's army for war with NATO right after the early grades. Well, there was already the Hitler Youth. We remember how that ended. Apparently, these people want to repeat it. I mean, they're always shouting everywhere, yeah, we can do it again. I wonder what kind of war Putin's kids are being prepared for. These little kabai, these kabai children, who, I remind you, are studying Chinese. Well, as I understand it, the children of Russian officials who study in London, Paris, and live in the States are apparently preparing for war with NATO right there, right in the enemy's lair. Look at how cleverly they've come up with this. As part of preparing for war with NATO, the children of Russian officials have sent their kids to these NATO countries to, as they say, study the enemy from within. And here's another purely Russian news item from a country, let me remind you, where everything is built, everyone talks, and everyone is obsessed with traditional values. The State Duma has stated that a law banning domestic violence would force Russians to give up on getting married. If a law punishing domestic violence is adopted in Russia, it will lead to a decrease in the number of marriages, because men will not want to get married out of fear of ending up at the police station. This is the conviction of Nina Ostanina, head of the State Duma Committee on Family Affairs. This is how she responded to the recently submitted bill to the State Duma on banning domestic violence. In other words, Russian males will be afraid to get married because after the adoption of this law, they will no longer be able to beat their wives and children with impunity. And why would they want a marriage in which they can't beat their wife and children? So, let me remind you, this is the chairwoman of the State Duma Committee on Family Protection saying that this law shouldn't be passed, otherwise marriages will fall apart. Well, as always, everything with Putin is supposedly soaring into space. The MOEX index has crashed on the Russian stock market. Investors are selling off everything they have. Gazprom shares have plummeted to 100 rubles. This is a new historic anti-record. The Russian Federation's economy is in turmoil. And against this backdrop, yesterday the chief communist Zhuganov came out and said, "We need to take citizens' deposits. Let those deposits work for the state." Well, everything is under control. The US has stated that it is changing its rhetoric and is demanding an immediate ceasefire from Russia, said Lavrov, but the media are presenting it a bit differently. Trump gave Zelensky the green light to put pressure on Russia in order to bring it to the negotiating table, writes the Kiev Independent. As I understand it, Ukraine now has some cards to play, and immediately information appears that some very interesting gifts will soon be sent to Russia, with a range of 930 kilometers and a warhead of 225 kilograms. Well, recently Ushakov said that the spirit of Anchorage has left Russia. That's it, it's over. It would be nice if the spirit of Putin, this Botox cocoon, would leave as well. And Lavrov also said that Trump was pumped full of destructive ideas. Trump just doesn't like losers. Putin kept telling Trump that he was about to take Donbass, both last year and the year before. But in the end, it turns out that Ukraine is seizing the initiative. Trump looks at all this in a completely pragmatic way. He sees how giant nuclear Russia has been trying to take Mali Tokmachka for 5 years now, and of course, to him, Putin is no great conqueror. Let me remind you, Putin, who constantly lies to him, even about the attack on his own residence in Valdai. Basically, the balding muskrat just can't get out of the war, while Trump needs to end this war. Time is running out for Trump, he has elections in the fall, so in my opinion it's easier to give Ukraine the means so that Ukraine can force this underground scum to the negotiating table. Well, friends, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel, don't forget, and let's help our assault troops from the 33rd Regiment. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.